Well, the Cardinals call up Thomas Saggese. Maybe that's a sign they're ready to play the kids. Except they sent down Victor Scott to do it. Oh, boy. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you. Wednesday, September 11th, 2024. As the Cardinals last night, well, laid another egg, and it really does seem to be all over but the crying at this point when it comes to the Cardinals' postseason hopes as they fall to the Reds 3-0. It's another game where the Cardinal offense just doesn't get it going. They're down to 500 once again. They're 72-72 as of this recording on Wednesday afternoon. And, yeah, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of momentum toward making a push down the stretch. They're 11 games behind the Milwaukee Brewers. I'll check the wild card standings as well. Feels a little fruitless, but they are 6.5 behind a tie between the Braves and the Mets right now for that third wild card spot. It really does seem like October baseball, and it's going to be played without your St. Louis Cardinals in 2024. And one of the roster moves that was announced or reported, I guess I should say, ahead of time by Robert Murray of Fansided earlier in the day on Tuesday that, well, Thomas Saggese is getting the call up for the Cardinals, the top prospect, the infielder who can play some short, can play some third, can play some second, has been playing a lot of shortstop recently in Memphis, getting ready for a potential opportunity at the big league level, you'd have to figure. And now he makes that start yesterday at shortstop, giving Mason Wynn a day off. But the way the Cardinals do it is by optioning Victor Scott II, another top prospect, back to AAA. So the notion of playing the kids is not maybe the one that the Cardinals are doing with both feet in. And so we'll talk about that today on B-Schaeff Daily, as well as how Michael Siani obviously plays into this because he's going to be getting that center field opportunity, as he has been, ahead of Victor Scott since he returned from injury. Just general philosophy on what the Cardinals are doing there and how we feel about things today. That's what we're getting into today on B-Schaeff Daily. We'll try to go down on the farm as well. Brought to you by, of course, Hastings Layers Premium Eggs before we get out of here. But want to tell you guys real quickly about Underdog Fantasy before we get too deep into this. I'm proud to be partnering with Underdog Fantasy, my favorite place to play fantasy games. You got to check out their Pick'em game. It's so easy to play. You pick 2 to 8 stats from your favorite players and choose whether they will go higher or lower. And it really is that simple. If it sounds like fun, sign up with promo code B-Schaeff. You see it there on your screen to claim your free pick and a first-time deposit offer up to potentially $1,000 in bonus cash. And they've got a cool thing going on right now where, find the graphic here for you guys, as I continue to kind of learn some things. CeeDee Lamb, if you're a football fan, CeeDee Lamb, there's a free pick going on at Underdog Fantasy where if you pick higher than 0.5 total yards for CeeDee Lamb in the Cowboys' next game, well, that's going to be a pick that I think has a pretty good chance to win. That is the free pick going on this week at Underdog Fantasy. So the link is in the description to this video. If you guys want to sign up, make sure you do so with the promo code B-Schaeff. Underdog Fantasy, a new sponsor, or a partner, I should say, of the program and of the YouTube channel. So appreciate you guys for supporting B-Schaeff Daily and for supporting Underdog Fantasy as well. Okay, enough about that. Let's get into the Cardinals conversation. So Victor Scott II is an exciting young prospect. The Cardinals called him back up. They gave him some run. He was looking a little bit better, a little more confident at the plate. We know what he's capable of doing in the field. And then Michael Siani comes back from his injury, was out about a month, maybe a little longer with that oblique, and basically upon his return has assumed, or reassumed, really, the everyday center field role for the Cardinals and for manager Ollie Marmol. Look, the Cardinals like Michael Siani, and I know that this is a popular topic of conversation on social media right now because of the move to option Victor Scott II back to Memphis. And this should be a time of year where you are getting the young players opportunities so that they're more prepared for next year, right? Like that's the way a lot of people view this situation, and understandably so, because the Cardinals are out of it. They're not going to make the playoffs. I know 6.5 games, technically anything could happen, but you would need a monumental collapse by multiple teams in front of you in the wild card standings, coupled with the Cardinals just going on an absolute run. So the odds of all of those things being stacked together, it just seems very, very unlikely that the Cardinals are going to make that move. A lot of you guys have been on that boat for weeks and weeks at this point, so that should not really come as a surprise to anybody. But what does it mean for the way the Cardinals want to handle their roster and handle their lineups and maybe even their pitching rotation the rest of the way. Well, when you hear, hey, Thomas Saggese is going to be called up, I guess the assumption is, okay, good. They're going to, maybe somebody needs an injury, IL, which is not a good thing, but it's something that happens from time to time, especially we saw it at the end of last season. After we knew the Cardinals were out of it, they started ILing a bunch of guys for, minor to moderate injuries, and then that allowed for guys like, say, Mason Wynn down the stretch last season to get regular playing time, of course. And so you think, look, the Cardinals are in maybe not the exact same scenario. They've already won more games this year, 72, than they did all of last season, but it is similar in so much as, well, they didn't make the playoffs last year, and you kind of figure that's the direction of this season as well, so play the kids, right? And Thomas Saggese, I think, has been knocking on the door of a promotion for quite a while. His numbers really over the second half of the season have been great at AAA. When you look at the total numbers of a 751 OPS, that's fine. But when you look at the recency of how he's been performing, he had a torrid pace in July where he had an OPS of 990 during the month of July. Hit 349 for an average on base of 400, almost slugging 600. He was at 590 on the slugging percentage during the month of July. Just fantastic numbers by Saggese. And then you saw the month of August, the power even uptick a little bit more as the batting average dipped back down. He was still demonstrating power, had 7 home runs in August with a 771 OPS, and then was around 800 in the 29 or so at-bats that he got in September before the Cardinals call him up. So really over the second half of the year, he's been a much more potent threat than he was toward the beginning. He seems to be coming into his own, hitting 12 home runs since July 1st and has 20 on the season. So, yeah, it was time to see what Saggese could do, and they've been playing him a ton at shortstop. That's his most prominent position this year in AAA in terms of the playing time that he has gotten down there, preparing him not to take over Mason Wynn's job, but to have that be an opportunity and an option for the big league Cardinals because, of course, Brandon Crawford was in that role for a while. It was a role that didn't have a ton of utility because of how often Mason Wynn is active and playing. And so they figured, we don't really maybe need Crawford around with the production that he's giving, but Saggese could fill that role and could also back up second, could back up third, and lo and behold, you might find a decent amount of playing time for Thomas Saggese. That was my opinion a number of weeks ago when they dumped Brandon Crawford, and it's still my opinion, and we'll see what Ollie Marmol is kind of able to do with those spots and how often he could find Thomas Saggese's name into those positions. I think it's certainly worthwhile to get his feet under him. A lot of people would make the claim, though, that the same should be said for Victor Scott because he did start to look a little bit more potent at the plate. He did look a little more comfortable in the at-bats he was taking. The numbers didn't really take off. I'll find the game logs of Victor Scott II's second promotion. Remember, he started the season with the team and then went back down for a while, came back up upon the Siani injury, and did get a good amount of run from August the 5th to September the 8th. That's the run of his game logs. But here's the numbers. 222 average, 259 on base, and a 370 slug in that span. A couple of home runs for Victor Scott in 85 plate appearances. That's a 629 OPS, 27 strikeouts in 85 plate appearances, so a K rate well above 30%. So while he did look better than he did at the beginning of the season, where when they optioned him on April 19th, he had an 085 average and a 274 OPS. Got into one game at Rickwood Field for a defensive replacement late, and then was obviously sent back and only returned on August the 5th. So the numbers for the season on Victor Scott, he's still only got an OPS of 478. He's hitting 164. I don't want to punish him for what happened in April, though. I think it was pretty clear he had some growing yet to do and has made some strides in AAA and then got the chance over the last month plus, and it looked better, 629 OPS, but not the kind of numbers where you go, well, he's just got to be in there. But if you're going to comp it to a Mason Wynn, which I think is fair, I think I've told this story previously about at spring training, asking Ollie Marmol, do you see parallels to where Victor Scott II is at this point coming into this camp in 2024 to where Mason Wynn was a year ago? And he said he could see those parallels in terms of just the readiness. And I think Victor Scott probably would have been better suited to get a call-up later in the year than have to start with the team. But he had a good spring. They had a need in center field, and they went for it. I had no problem with it at the time. I was advocating for it, and it didn't work out. I'm not afraid to admit that. But I think over the course of this year, he's had some growth and then an opportunity to hit the ground running maybe for a September call-up, or as it happened in this case, an August call-up, and then go from then to the end of the season and gain that growth, even if it is just maybe a 600 OPS. Because remember, Mason Wynn last year hit like 150. His numbers at the big league level were not particularly strong over the final push of that season. Checking it out, remember they called him up and made sure that he was still going to have rookie eligibility with the amount of time that they used him. A 172 average and a 467 OPS. That was Mason Wynn last year for 137 plate appearances, 122 at bats. So he kept the rookie eligibility. I think 150, if I'm not mistaken, is the threshold there where he would have lost it. And now he's sort of tailing a little bit off offensively, down to a 728 OPS. But that's night and day compared to what you saw from Mason Wynn in the brief spell at the end of last season. And I think you would be hard-pressed to argue against the notion that Mason Wynn truly benefited from getting those 137 plate appearances and playing in those 37 big league games last year for a team that was going nowhere fast. We knew those Cardinals weren't going to make the playoffs by the time September 1st or late August, whatever it was, for Mason Wynn when they finally called him up. Whenever time that rolled around, we knew the deal. We knew where the Cardinals were going, and it was basically nowhere. These Cardinals now are in a spot where they're going nowhere. They're going to have more wins. They're still straining to maybe have a 500 record because consecutive losing seasons in St. Louis hasn't happened in non-strike shortened or COVID shortened seasons since like the 50s or something insane like that. So there is a point of pride there to not have a losing season if they can avoid it. But more than anything, I think the organization would benefit from having a look at guys that could be contributing next year and getting them that key experience in big league games. You can't simulate that experience. You can only have it when you have it to offer. And there's a case to be made that they do right now with Victor Scott II. They could play him, they could have him up, and they could play him every single day. And maybe that could end up paying the type of dividends for him in 2025 that were paid toward Mason Wynn in 2023 when he then came into 2024 ready to be an everyday guy. And he has, by and large, thrived in the role that he's been in. I think Mason Wynn is a present fixture and mainstay and a future star for the Cardinals in what he's going to be able to do in the years ahead. So that was very beneficial to his game. I totally understand where a lot of people are coming from in making the same comp to Victor Scott and saying, well, why is it that they're not willing to do that for him when he has shown the improvements from what it looked like in April to what it looked like in August and early September? Why would that not be something the Cardinals would look to prioritize? And the answer right now appears to be Michael Siani. And I can understand the frustration with that because for a lot of people, look, Siani was an afterthought as recently as this February. He just wasn't really considered in the long-term plans of the organization. He was a waiver claim that they added late in the 2023 season, got a little bit of time, but the team didn't really honestly know a lot about him. They knew he was a glove-first guy, but he's had some moments this year, and obviously he's a great bunter. He's a base stealer. He's a superb defensive center fielder. Probably should be in the Gold Glove running, but I think he missed the cutoff on the innings total by the threshold that it needed to be, so I don't think he's going to be in consideration for Gold Glove. But to me, he's one of the best outfielders defensively in baseball at the premium spot of center field. So I understand wanting to get Siani in there. But Siani, and look, he's not like an old, crafty veteran. Siani just turned 25 years old in July, so he's a young player as well. I think the public sentiment being very anti-Michael Siani pertains to everybody thinks they know what he is offensively. They think he's nothing offensively. He's at a 593 OPS this year. He was really hitting his stride right before the injury. For a multi-month pace, had a 275 batting average, which is pretty solid. Doesn't hit for a ton of power, has just 2 home runs on the season and 284 plate appearances to this point. And the batting average on the season is 245. So light hitting still would definitely be an apt description for Michael Siani. But what we've seen from him defensively, and I think there had been some growth offensively, this guy to me projects as somebody that I'd like to see on the Cardinals for a number of years ahead. However, I think to get him in the lineup every day and to be able to justify that on a competitive winning team, I think the OPS has to at least start with a 6, and ideally it's more than 6.0. It's 620 or 630 or 650, and then you're talking about pushing him toward Tommy Edman territory offensively, where Edman's like a 700 OPS guy, although I just saw he had a couple of home runs in one game for the Dodgers. That's cool. We knew that would happen. I said when the trade happened, Tommy Edman will have a big moment in the postseason for the Dodgers, and I still maintain that. It is not surprising to me at all to see Tommy Edman have success. He's a good player. He wasn't healthy for a long, long time. Now he is, and he's playing really well. And to me, that's awesome to see. But when you look at the situation for Michael Siani, I think he's a better defender than Tommy Edman in center field. and maybe about the same as far as a base stealer. Bunting is a very kind of low grade category of consideration, but Siani is better in that category. Offense is really what you're lacking with Siani, and because I think we saw a good bit of run for him where maybe it was the BABIP, batting average on balls in play, luck going in his favor, instead of maybe early on in the season it went against him, Siani's numbers started to look better. What does Siani, where you find your level eventually, what's his level? Is it a 620 OPS? Is it a 600 OPS? Is it closer to the 575, 580 OPS? Where does that land? Look, I don't think Michael Siani is a 700 OPS guy over the course of a full big league season, and I think Victor Scott II is going to be. I think he's got that potential to be. I don't think he's that right now, though, either. But again, Mason Wynn was a 470 OPS for 137 plate appearances at the end of last season, and then instantly, I should say, turned himself into a 720 OPS guy that he is right now. He's OPSing 728. He's a 270 hitter, and his skills are, I know he's struggling a little bit at the plate right now, but his skills are undeniable, and he's going to be a fixture for this team. Last 15 days, Mason's hitting 163 with a 461 OPS, so he's definitely struggling a little bit right now. But my point is, I don't want to read too much into the Victor Scott numbers as a reason to not play him, because the numbers didn't matter last year for Mason Wynn, and you saw how much of a benefit came from that. My other thought, though, is I am very much team Michael Siani. I said I think he should be on the team long term, but I don't know if you have to play Michael Siani every day right now to demonstrate that you believe in him for next year as a fourth outfielder or as somebody that could come into spring with a chance to win the job over Victor Scott or whoever else is going to be competing there for center field. The problem is both of these guys are left-handed, and they play a very similar style of game. I think that Victor Scott has higher offensive potential. I think that right now Siani might be the better offensive player at this moment, because I think he's got a little bit more acclimated to it. Victor Scott, I think, is going to get there and has the higher upside. If you're the Cardinals, though, you're okay, how do we allocate this playing time down the stretch? The reason they're doing it the way they're doing it very well may be because they already know Victor Scott is part of their future, and they might want to get as much of a look at Siani as they can to determine, all right, is this somebody that we can showcase for a trade? Is this somebody that we keep around as a fourth outfielder? What do we end up doing? Because, yes, there is a redundancy there with Scott and Siani. I personally don't think you have to trade either of them, but if Siani plays well down the stretch and establishes that he's a pretty good piece, maybe the Cardinals could get more out of him than you thought, and that's the way that they decide to proceed, and they move him. Or maybe it's, there's not a lot of value there, but we do think he's got value to our team if Victor Scott isn't ready, and it comes into camp next year as, hey, it's Victor Scott's opportunity to win the job if he can, and if he doesn't, he starts at AAA, which may be something that Victor Scott still needs in 2025, or he can start as a platoon or a timeshare. Doesn't really make sense as a platoon because they both hit left-handed with Siani in center field at the big league level. There's a lot of decisions. I think the guy that makes sense to look at is Victor Scott, but I also understand that prior to maybe the last handful of days, there was still that argument that the Cardinals can try to win all their games and make the playoffs. I think that's kind of gone. The loss to the Reds is what did it to me, where I'm like, all right, these Reds are pesky, and you guys can't seem to get hits off of them, certainly cannot seem to score off of them. And even with the pitching being, you lose 3-0, it's not really the pitching that you put that game onto. Palante walks a bunch of guys. That's what he does. It doesn't bother me that he goes 5 innings, 3 earned runs, while walking 5 and allowing 6 hits. That's 11. A lot more than 3 runs are going to score most of the time you give up 11 base runners. Palante also struck out 6. I'm still fine with Palante. I'm fine with him for now. I'm fine with him for next year. As I'm doing this recording, though, the Cardinals announced that Lance Lynn has been activated from the injured list, which we knew was coming because he was going to be Wednesday's starter regardless. It's Roycroft that is optioned to Memphis. We won't have to spend a lot of time on that necessarily, but just something to keep in mind as we're kind of talking our way through this team and what they want to do down the stretch, because Lance Lynn, they're going to get a look at him, but is it for just he's a veteran, so you got to play him, or is it, do we want to pick up this option for next year that we have on Lance Lynn? How do we look at Palante? How do we look at these guys? That's happening in the pitching staff and in the rotation, and the same that it's happening right now with this center field situation. I think the way that I come down on this is Victor Scott's long-term part of the future. They want to get a longer look almost at Siani to see what his role could be and maybe to establish trade value. I'm fine with playing Siani, though. I would have liked to have seen Ollie Marmol when both were up actually play one in a corner and play the other in center field. And maybe Jordan Walker is your right fielder, and you can have just elite defensive left and center field and kind of see the way that looks. But they're not really going to sit Lars Nootbaar because the belief is that he's still a big part of their future as well, which is he's a better offensive player than Victor Scott or Michael Siani at this point. So I understand it. The truth of the matter is I don't think you have to trade Siani or Victor Scott. I could see that there's going to be the impetus to do so. Make the trade that makes the team better. Don't make the trade just because you felt like you had to, would be my kind of edict for the offseason. But they've got other out, like Burleson, left-handed hitting outfielder. Maybe he's going to play first base. We'll see what ends up happening with Goldschmidt, who's still performing pretty well. Was 2 for 3 with a walk in the game last night. Nootbaar, what is Lars Nootbaar? Is he going to ascend, or is he going to kind of be in this kind of middle 730 OPS guy who, you can't always count on to be in the field because he gets hurt a lot? Like, what's a long-range view on Nootbaar? Jordan Walker, what's the team going to do with him? He's still kind of struggling, but having some moments. Is he a fixture, part of the future, or are they going to miss the window with him and not be able to trade him for value and maybe come back a couple of years later and wish that they had? Or do they still believe in Jordan Walker, who's still very young? Like, there's a lot of spots on this outfield group where you go, there's a lot of different things they could do. And one decision's going to lead to the next. They've got to plant their flag somewhere. I do think an outfielder needs to be traded, but you don't come into the offseason going, oh my gosh, we got to trade an outfielder, because these are all guys that you'd like to think are valuable. So you make the move that can maybe get you something that you need for something that you have extra of, but you also have all these outfielders that none of them are really proven. I'm counting Nootbaar within that. I'm counting Burleson within that. Like, they're having okay seasons. Nootbaar's had good seasons in the past. But who are the fixtures that you're going to build around if you're the Cardinals? I think that's what needs to be decided. They might already think that Victor Scott is one of them. It's just, and maybe, look, he could come back up in a couple of weeks. Who knows? Maybe he'll still get some run in the big leagues before the end of the season. But clearly they want to get a look at Michael Siani. I think Ollie Marmol, he still makes out the lineups, and so he wants to continue to see Michael Siani because he trusts him out there. There is still the implication of, look, we know there's going to be changes in the org, but Ollie Marmol is under contract. Has he gotten the assurances of, like, look, play your lineup that we think, is going to help us win, but also help us develop, because you should still be caring about both things as the guy who's going to be managing the team in 2025 when we do technically have a chance to make the playoffs. Like, those are sort of the things that you wonder how much, input is being had from the front office places, and maybe the answer is not very much. They trust Ollie to do his job, but when they see he's choosing Siani over Victor Scott every day and not mixing it up at all, then it's like, all right, we got to make sure this kid gets some playing time. And look, a decision that sounds weird in the moment is still going to be explained in a way that sounds like it makes sense from the organizational perspective. And they said they believed that even with Victor Scott not playing, him getting the instruction and practicing on his outfield routes and everything like that before games was better than him actually playing at the minor league level and getting at-bats and everyday playing time. That was the way that the organization described it, and then obviously a few days later, they optioned him. So, was that the truth? Was that not the truth? Maybe sometimes it's just the way to explain something. Maybe there's a little bit of truth to both. Like, yes, there is benefit to this instruction, but there's only so many days in a row that it can benefit you before it's like, okay, now go down and try to implement it the best you can in game action. Game speed at the minor league level, not going to be the same as at the major league level, but you're just kind of working through with the best of what you got right now, I think, is where the Cardinals are at with some of these things. So you guys let me know on the Victor Scott versus Michael Siani decision. I think Scott's role is, if he comes into spring next year and thrives, he's going to have a spot and he's going to play a bunch. Whereas Siani, they might be showcasing for trade. They might be trying to figure out still what do they make of him, and is there value there, and is there somebody, is that somebody that's just going to be a fourth outfielder? Because I think he could be very valuable in that role, could play any of the outfield spots, can take an at-bat late off the bench, but obviously the bat is not a strong suit of his game. So defensive replacement off the bench, but we're thinking in terms of a winning team, a team that's trying to make the playoffs. I think he's got a very nice role as a down bench guy on one of those teams. But for this Cardinals team, maybe not as much utility for what Michael Siani's bringing unless he's in the everyday lineup helping his pitching staff with his great defense. I like both players. I don't think the Cardinals have to trade one or the other. Injuries do happen, but I understand where the sentiment's coming from about, man, this is a team that right now should be getting into the mode of looking ahead to next year. And Victor Scott playing the way that Mason Wynn did down the stretch last year would probably be a big benefit to his future, but it's not the decision the Cardinals are making at this point in time. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think about that. And we'll go down on the farm real quick before we get out of here because I want to tell you what Michael McGreevy did in his most recent appearance. It's time to go down on the farm. Brought to you by Hastings Layers Premium Eggs.
You'll be happier than a jackass eating thistle.
Huh? Hastings Layers Premium Eggs. Appreciate you guys for your support of Down on the Farm all season long. Let's talk about Memphis and Michael McGreevy. A 5-3 win for the Redbirds over the Nashville Sounds yesterday at that beautiful ballpark in Nashville. I love that park. I've been there. It's a great time. Michael McGreevy, 5 innings, 3 runs allowed. They were all earned, allowed 7 hits and a couple of walks, 4 strikeouts. Would love to see McGreevy get a start at the big league level before the season is over, but we'll see if there's room for that because you're penciling Lance Lynn back into the rotation. That makes 6 now as it is. What will they do with Palante? We know that they've already kind of shuffled Steven Matz into the bullpen, which I think is more than fine. You kind of already know what you have in him, and the decision should not be based on, whatever happens between now and the end of the season on the Steven Matz front. So I think that's a reasonable way to go about it. But man, McGreevy, look, his numbers haven't been unbelievable, but they've been pretty good in AAA, and we saw him look really, really good once in the big leagues. And so you'd like to think that the Cardinals could find a way to reward that and maybe get him back up here one more time before the end of the season. So we'll have to see if that ends up happening. 7-3, the Springfield Cardinals got the win over the San Antonio Missions, and there was not a lot really to write home about that game. Jimmy Crooks, our catcher down there that we like to talk about, was 1 for 3, also walked, and he's got a 321 average with a 915 OPS. I think Memphis will definitely be the spot for him next year. Komar was the starting pitcher, did a nice job, 7 2/3 innings, 3 runs allowed with 7 strikeouts. But that's kind of a look at the farm real quick before we go. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening. That is going to do it for this edition of B-Schaeff Daily, and we'll talk to you next time on the show. Peace.